Hello, all you wonderful people out there. It's D with the Broken Brain Podcast, and it's Thursday, this story, where we're telling the story of the miracle question. What if you went to bed and woke up tomorrow and your problem was solved? That's a short version of it. We're going to get into the long version of it and more, as well as talking about what it has to do with killing rats and how, if not for killing rats and then not killing rats, it would never have been born. Is that an exaggeration? Sure, probably. But it is an interesting lead in and related. Thursdays, of course, are our day to dive into the history of psychology and mental health. This is a few minutes that all of you out there in the whole world are hearing. But those of you lucky, fortunate, and let's be honest, cool enough that you are one of the donors to help the show keep going over on the Patreon, well, you get to hear the whole enchilada, my friends. But let's make good use of the first few minutes for those that are only hearing that. The miracle question is probably the best known intervention from a discipline of therapy called solution focused brief therapy, or SFBT, or SFBT, if you will. This was a particular mode of therapy that was developed in the 1970s. Back in those days, there was a push at that time to try to see if therapy could become more pragmatic and maybe a bit quicker than it was being viewed. Therapy and psychotherapy grew out of psychoanalysis, which was an attempt to impact the subconscious. Freud and his theories and such were focused around the subconscious, things that by definition we could not know, and that's where he had lots of theories about what he felt was going on under the surface. And that the certain type of talk therapy and psychoanalysis, which later morphed to be called psychotherapy and changed quite a bit along the way, but basically the thought was originally that talking about these things and getting at them would be able to affect changes in the subconscious, even if we didn't really know it. And that would be observed through how we felt and how we acted and those kinds of things. And this was anticipated to be a years-long process. Is that good? Is that bad? We'll talk about that a little bit, but it was something where it was done without the expectation of any kind of a quick fix, that you could be in analysis, as they used to say, or you could be doing therapy for years and years. People still do therapy for long term, but hopefully it looks maybe a little different in our expectations. One of the benefits of having a long-term relationship with a therapist is that you get to know your issues, and particularly if you're dealing with something that is ongoing, hopefully, even though you may accomplish some of the goals of health, reduced crisis, and resolution of trauma, some of those different things that you've healed from, you may decide to keep working, and because you have a place to check in, or if you have a pervasive issue, I know for myself, I have bipolar disorder. That's not going away. And it does me good to periodically check in with my therapist. Maybe not as often as I do at a time of high need, but I have many clients who have been seeing me kind of off and on for a long, long time. They'll come back in if they need something. Or there are some, we certainly probably decrease frequency over time, but that's kind of up to them. But the movement at this time in the 70s was to try to get from this expectation of forever's ever with maybe not always very much to show from it. At least that was the belief at the time. And to move into having shorter, brief interventions that were going to help, and then kind of were able to be like donezo with the whole thing. And one of the approaches that lent itself to this was cognitive behavioral therapy. And then solution-focused brief therapy grew out of that, with a couple important differences. Cognitive behavioral therapy, as you are probably aware, is all about getting into our emotional reactions through our thought processes and trying to impact the underlying beliefs and emotions in order to do that. I've said before, as we've talked on these, when we get into things like rational emotive behavioral therapy, I believe that there are some elements of cognitive behavioral therapy that look and sound and feel and walk and smell just like REBT, or basically that cognitive behavioral therapy at its purest doesn't really touch on emotion as much as modern day CBT does. We look at it as, if we are doing that, as connected in there a little bit more than I think the purists would. So there you go. If you have, feel different about it, let me know, I guess. But that's my understanding and my observations in the field. But one of the main differences in solution-focused therapy is that it really doesn't concern itself as much with any underlying beliefs or emotional processes, in so much that it is more focused on, well, solutions of saying like, well, what do we do now today? So think of it as very much a now today model, focusing on the present. And there's several principles to that we'll get into. But first, I wanted to let you know a little bit about where it done come from as far as the development. It was actually developed by a married couple of psychologists by the names of Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kim Berg. Dr. Shazar was originally a musician, actually. He was a jazz saxophonist, and he went into social work and was a research in this couple. It's very interesting that they both made a change into social work, whereas Insoo Kim Berg was studying pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical development, and of course Shazar was a musician, as I just said. To hear the rest of this episode, go to patreon.com/brokenbrain and consider becoming a subscriber today.